Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Edison and Dr. M. Dentith. Hello, and welcome to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy. I am Josh Edison. Sitting next to me, as always, Dr. M. R.X. Dentith.
Who is especially drunk.
I think you might be putting that on slightly, but not much. You've been at the source again, haven't you?
I blame our good friend Nick.
Yes.
He's been taking me out to the bars and the tasting platters and the getting drunk. And frankly, Nick, it's entirely your fault.
No, I would believe that. Unfortunately, we did the opening sketch in only 2 takes, as opposed to last time's 13 or something like that. So you're obviously fairly compos mentis, or whatever the expression is, but we won't let that stop us from having a dashed good time.
Surprise!
Hey! Yes. We're talking about surprises of the October variety.
In February, is what is the most surprising time to have your October surprise.
Exactly,
frankly, no one is going to suspect an October surprise in February. Also, April Sun in Cuba. Hey.
Yes, that's the brand of rapscallion drunkenness we've come to expect.
Also, that's a New Zealand song.
It is
that's
a New Zealand
entirely.
Song. That's true.
That's for those of us back home.
Also, for those of us not back home, the reference to the nation's capital being Epsom is a bad thing. Probably doesn't bear explaining.
Oh, yeah. For those of you who don't live in the nation.
Or for those of you who don't live.
It's true. For those of you who don't live, Epsom being the capital of the country, not a worry. For those of you who do live, for those of you who live within our nation's boundaries, that's a big worry indeed. For those of you who don't live inside of our nation's boundaries, you have no idea where Epsom is, and thus you don't care. And that is why you are bad people who deserve to be killed. Is that right, Joshua?
I wouldn't quite go that far.
Oh.
Maybe just permanently injured or mildly inconvenienced.
Josh thinks you should only be permanently injured with, say, a broken leg or a lung that doesn't work. I think you should die!
Right, well, let's take a break from wishing death upon our listeners.
Do you think we'll get more patrons with my wishing death upon people who are listening to this podcast?
I don't know, it could be courting the masochist vote there, it could be courting the secretly self-loathing vote.
It's true. There are people out there who are going, we should give money to this podcast if only they wish death upon us.
Yep. We're saying what you're all thinking.
Yes. Especially you, Brian.
Brian. Okay. Enough beating about the bush. Let us beat about the Reagan instead. Did you see I made a presidential pun there?
Hilarious October surprise. Yes. Oh, looks a mercy.
But seriously, let's talk about Bush and Reagan and Nixon and stuff.
Do we have to?
Yes. That's the topic.
Okay. Let's talk about Bush, Reagan,
Nixon, Carter. Bit of Clinton, bit of Trump, even maybe. McCain. You'll see. I'm spoiling things here. Let's just get into it.
He's forcing me to do it. I don't want to do it. He's forcing me to do it. So, Josh, it's February. Surprise me.
I'm going to surprise you by saying we're talking about October. And not just any October. October 1980.
Is it the April Sun in October?
No. Also October 1972 and a few other Octobers in between.
All right. Talk to me first about October surprises, because they're a bit of a bon mot in American political discussion.
They're almost a bit of a cliche now, yeah. So, this is something we've talked about before. The October surprise, if you're not aware, American elections always take place on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November, if I recall, in November anyway, and which means that it's sort of become a bit of a thing that some surprising event will come up in October just in time to sort of grab all the headlines, shake up the voter base, and maybe help sway the election one way or another. So the phrase October surprise was first used in connection with the 1972 presidential election, which was McGovern versus Nixon. And so I'm sure we've mentioned this before, but in the lead up to the 72 election, Henry Kissinger basically announced that peace in Vietnam was imminent, which is what the people had been. My
astoundingly good Nixon impression is.
I thought he was.
Peace in my time. Or is that my Churchill impression? Peace in my time.
It's also your DeForest Kelley impression, I think.
God damn it. I'm a DeForest Kelley impersonator, not a Nixon impersonator or a Churchill impersonator.
Could do a Christopher Lloyd in Back to the Future as well, I think, if you really...
Marty, we're going to get back to the future!
Yep. So basically Kissinger, had sort of right close to the election, came up with this announcement that, hooray, peace is imminent, which was great for Nixon.
Marty, we've got to check what your children are doing!
And the government went Nixon's way. So I actually forgot to write down who first used the phrase October surprise, but it came fairly
Was it Christopher Lloyd?
It might have actually been Christopher. Could have been DeForest Kelley in an episode of Star Trek.
God damn it, Kirk! This is an October surprise, not a Ferengi insertion of a penis into my rectum.
Pretty sure they didn't have Ferengi in the original series, Matt. This is a continuity nightmare.
You're a continuity nightmare. So is your mother.
That's true. And this sort of became the thing. I assume 1972 wasn't the first time there'd been a shocking thing to shake up the election just beforehand, but
which
it was the first time.
Kind of makes sense because if you have your elections at the same time every year, then it's going to turn out that if there's going to be the big, shocking revelation, which is meant to make the public be on your side, what's going to happen then? An October surprise.
But yeah, so at any rate, the 72 one was where the actual phrase October surprise popped up, and then it kept popping up every major election after that. So in the lead up to the Clinton-Bush election, there was a release of information about the Iran-Contra affair and how much Bush had known about that beforehand. In the lead up to the Bush Jr. Al Gore election, there was revelations about George Bush's youthful drink driving convictions.
Didn't do anything to save the election though,
Didn't do anything. Well, and he apparently got in front of it straight. Like the instant the thing came out, he immediately had a press conference and said, "Yep, no, it's true. I was a bad little boy." In those exact words, I assume.
Bad little boy. And I once was with Tiny Blair. And I killed some people, but you know, with Tony Blair, it's all fine.
His mother did kill someone, didn't she?
Yes.
She killed someone with a car.
It's actually quite disturbing. American politics is really, really disturbing the more you look into it.
Then, so moving towards the McCain-Obama election, there was in October of that year, there was the announcement that Obama's half-aunt was an illegal immigrant, which was perhaps a bit of a stretch, didn't seem to do much there. And then, of course, we had in the most recent election, October, start of October is when the whole Access Hollywood tape painting Trump in a bad light came out. Right near the end of October, there was, of course, the announcement from James Comey that said basically nothing more than, hey, remember Hillary Clinton and her emails? Didn't actually have anything of substance.
What about Trump grabbing this woman by the pussy?
Well, yes, that was the Access Hollywood thing I was alluding to. Now, of course, as you can see already, sometimes the October surprise worked and sometimes it didn't. It worked well. I don't know I've completely forgotten how to phrase this. Basically, sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the elections went the way of the October surprise, sometimes it didn't. So it's kind of hard to say
Republicans grab the Democrats by the pussy.
It's true.
And sometimes
much molesting of house cats.
No, see, I watched Knives Out the other day, and I'm absolutely stuck with Daniel Craig with his
southernish accent.
Yeah, I guess you could say it's a southernish accent. It just appears to be Daniel Craig being allowed to say whatever he likes with a long drawl. But I quite enjoyed listening to it and also playing the piano. Bing!
Yeah,
Anytime I
think
liked. Also, can you light me up a cigar? Because I'm Daniel Craig and I'm allowed to do whatever I like.
Because I'm James Bond.
Film. Yeah, I'm James Bond and you're James Bond too.
I haven't seen Logan Lucky, but apparently he has a lot of fun in that as well, with an entirely different American accent.
I'm sure he does, because that's the way that Daniel Craig is trying to divorce himself from the role of James Bond, a role which he is stuck with but doesn't want to play.
It really seems... Why are we talking about Daniel Craig? Just because?
Basically, because it's a surprise, baby.
Yep.
It's a surprise.
Well, I'm fine with that. So those were numerous October surprises, but the particular October surprise that we really want to talk about today is the 1980 October surprise. 1980 was the year of the presidential election between Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan.
Classic.
It's classic October surprise.
Classic Carter. And you know what I say about classic Carter?
He had a peanut farm that he had to sell. Was that Jimmy Carter?
I mean,
That's
that
Jimmy
is, but
Carter.
that wasn't where I was going.
Okay.
But fine, you go with the peanut farm. That's you do you.
Yep. Right, so in the lead up to the 1980 presidential election, possibly the biggest deal at the time was the Iran hostage crisis.
Now, tell me, what was going on in Iran at the time?
Well, all sorts, but in particular, all the way back in November of 1979, the US embassy in Tehran was seized. A bunch of people, military and civilian individuals were held hostage. Basically, they moved to the ambassador's residence, 52 American diplomats and citizens, where they stayed for 444 days in the end.
That's more than a year.
That's a long time. So this is something that had been dragging out for a long, long time. If you've seen the movie Argo, Ben Affleck's thing.
About a science fiction movie they were trying to make in Iran and failed from memory.
Something like that, yes. That's what Argo is about. Did that one win like a best screenplay or something? Or did he got screenplay for Good Will Hunting? Didn't Argo win
God damn!
stuff?
I actually think he even may have won Best Director for Ahio, which
Strange times we live in.
yeah. So the Bat flick, he was not even the Bat flick
flick
anymore.
I reckon Robert Pattinson can do Batman.
I actually agree. I actually think he'd actually be really, really, because let's face it, both the lead actors from the Twilight films turned out to be really, really good. In the same respect that actually, truth be told, Daniel Radcliffe from Harry Potter has also turned out to be really, really good.
Good post-Potter.
The moral of the story is, if you're a child actor who's been cast in a young adult or child film by Warner Brothers at any particular point in the past, you're going to do good. You're going to do really, really good. And you don't need the support of this podcast, who's listened to by, at most, 800 people.
So, anyway, Argo, Iran hostage crisis, that's what was going on. This was, Jimmy Carter was the incumbent president, and so for the last year, he'd been doing his darndest to get the American citizens back, and the fact that he had failed to do so was a bit of a black mark on his presidency.
Which was occurring at the same time of a presidential election.
Yes, so October 1980, the presidential election is looming. Carter is being challenged by Republican Ronald Reagan.
Now, he was in the pictures, wasn't he?
He was a movie-type actor.
He was also a unionist back in the day, wasn't he?
I have no idea, but those Hollywood types generally are.
Oh no, he was a prominent unionist with the Screen Actors Guild.
Probably sounds about right, but then I assume once he became a Republican, not so fond of the unions?
Yeah, a little bit like, I'm about to say Orson Welles, but I don't actually mean Orson Welles. I mean the other guy who was in the Mouth of Madness.
Sam Neill?
No, Charlton Heston.
Right.
who used to be a quite explicit liberal, and then turned out to be not so liberal after all. And he's dead, you know.
He's dead. That's where that gets you.
It's true.
Being alive.
I mean, there's a whole bunch of other people who were in the NRA who were dead as well, but I'm not going to say anything about them.
No. That's just one conspiracy at a time. Thank you. So, as it turned out, the hostages were not released before the election, but
afterwards
remained a bad look for Carter. Reagan won the election, and the hostages were released quite soon after, suspiciously soon after.
To the point where people went, this is a little bit too suspicious, in that Carter was negotiating their release, and they weren't released before he was deposed. And yet Reagan gets elected, and the hostages are released within hours, basically.
Well, not within hours of the election result, but he did. He was inaugurated on January the 20th. Apparently, January the 19th, a deal was signed, and so literally 20 minutes after his inauguration, he was on the air announcing the return of these hostages.
So less than an hour, truth be told.
Yes, if we're talking about official
at which point you went, that's a little bit weird, in that surely if the American administration has been doing this much work, Carter would have got the
credit.
That word term.
Yes.
And he didn't, and that's just a little bit weird.
So the official theory, of course, in this case, is that it's just how things came out. Yes, it worked out very nicely for Reagan, but that was just the way that particular cookie happened to crumble.
It's an argument that when actually diplomacy works in a particular way. It's unfortunate that Reagan got the benefit of American diplomacy long term. At the same time, that was how the cookie,
for a year.
The cookie was going to crumble that way anyway. If Carter had won the election, he would have got the credit. So Reagan got the credit. But, that's how these things work.
But so the actual the conspiracy theory, though, is that the hostages could have been released earlier, but the elements of the Reagan campaign worked with Iran to ensure that they would keep the hostages until after the election. So in effect, it wasn't actually an October surprise, it was that they wanted to stop the possibility of an October surprise that would have benefited Carter.
Now, this was a position put forward by people like Christopher Hitchens and Lyndon LaRouche.
Good old Lyndon LaRouche. Yes, I believe the last time we were talking about these October surprises was when we devoted an entire episode to Lyndon LaRouche, because it was his people, the first people, I believe, to actually come up, to actually sort of present this conspiracy theory were... Where are we? I had it written down and now it's gone. Have you changed the notes when I wasn't looking?
Nope, I have not changed the notes. It's entirely your fault. You have no idea what's going on. So yeah, the whole point is that...
And then that's moved. Oh, there we go. Robert Dreyfuss, December 2, 1980 issue of Executive Intelligence Review.
Ah, yeah, the good old Executive Intelligence Review. Lyndon LaRouche special.
Yep, published by the followers of Lyndon LaRouche. So they were the first ones to actually come up. There was another thing, another scandal coming around at the same time, which was DebateGate, which I'm not a fan of the whole sticking gate on the
Now,
end.
was it DebateGate or was it DebateGate?
No, I'm afraid it was just DebateGate.
Well,
which has the benefit of rhyming. But,
I sit here being very disappointed.
DebateGate was the fact that apparently... During the presidential debates leading up to the election, it seemed that Reagan's team somehow managed to get President Carter's briefing papers before the debate so that they were able to sort of counter his points more effectively. These briefing papers were supposedly top secret and people outside of Carter's circle shouldn't have been able to get their hands on them. So there was an investigation into that, and so that was DebateGate. Apparently, during those investigations, they turned up documents from Reagan's campaign team that basically showed they were very much aware that if these hostages were released before the election, that's going to be a very good look for Carter. We really hope that doesn't happen, but that was as far as it was. There was no evidence there that they'd actually done anything to physically try and make this happen. But then along came LaRouche and his fellows who said, that it's too much of a coincidence. Some sort of a deal must have been done. They must have said to representative must have said to Iran, look, if our guy Reagan gets in, he's going to give you guys a good deal on something. So how about you hold off releasing those hostages, which will make it more likely that our mate Reagan will get in and then give you this good deal we're after. That was the suggestion. Now, people didn't really pay a lot of attention. Did people pay a lot of attention to LaRouche and his folks? He was a bit fringe.
LaRoucherites did, but the rest of the population did not. No. Although people like Hitchens. So the thing was, it wasn't just LaRouche who put forward the notion that there was something suspicious about what went on here. People like beloved Christopher Hitchens also went, yeah, there's something a bit suspicious about what went on here. I think, Christopher Hitchens, that maybe the Reagan campaign did something untoward to get these particular results.
Yeah, so there was a lot of supposition. It was a lot of sort of raising of eyebrows and just looking at the timing of it all.
Because the timing was quite really convenient for the opposition. But
like we say, it wasn't really the public at large wasn't that interested until along came Iran-Contra, which we've also talked about before. That was the whole the selling of weapons to people they shouldn't have been selling weapons to, and so on and so
forth. Like the Contras.
And once that came out into the open and was a big sort of conspiracy that had been laid bare in public, people started to pay a little bit more attention to other conspiracy theories that had been going around at the time. And people started looking into this October surprise conspiracy theory a bit more. So throughout the early 90s, a bunch of various publications, journalistic publications, investigated. And, it was a theory that was battered around, it was entertained, but no one ever actually came up with any proof that the theory might have been true. So that having a quick read through, the whole LaRouche factor did seem to count against it in some cases. It was sort of like, it's the kind of thing that we talk about. It was, well, Lyndon LaRouche has been going on about this, and he's one of those conspiracity theorist types. So
he's obviously mad, so we have to pay no attention to anything he's got to say.
But they weren't just journalistic investigations. There were governmental ones. There were 2 investigations that I could see, both of which didn't 100% say this conspiracy never happened, but they did very definitively say there is no evidence that this conspiracy theory is true. One of them, the House October Surprise Task Force, who I assume had their own cartoon series in the 1980s and joined together to form a giant robot.
Basically, I remember owning action figures from
the House October Surprise Task Force.
Yeah, I mean, the William Barr figure came with a desk and a pen.
And a robot lion, as I recall. It's a good thing, actually, because originally it was Task Force of the Committee on Foreign Affairs to investigate certain allegations concerning the holding of Americans as hostages by Iran in 1980. Yep. Wouldn't have made a good TV title.
But the car they came with was astounding, because it even had a little person who does the notes from the judge with the stenographic machine. Fantastic.
Yes, I think rebranding House October Surprise Task Force, excellent marketing move.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anyway, so this theory, it came up, it was battered around a bit. Nobody really, it was just one of those things that was always suspected, but nothing ever came of it. Now, the reason why we're talking about it today, here and now, in 2020, which is not 1980, it's not 1980 at all.
God damn it! I thought it was the 1980s.
It is quite literally 40 years since 1980.
If I was wearing a lapel, I'd be striking it out right now.
If I were wearing a monocle, it would have just popped out.
Yeah, that's the 1880s. That's just inappropriate. You do not understand how time works.
Well, only marginally, that's true. But no, just at the end of last year, there was an article in the New York Times, which some people have sort of seized upon to say, hang on a second, that the October surprise, and hang on, what? So the article itself was based on documents donated to Yale University. I assume not the lock-making company. That wouldn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I assume it is Yale,
yeah.
the university.
From the offices of David Rockefeller, of the Rockefellers.
Which we'll get back to in
We'll
just
get
a
back to
minute.
the Rockefellers. He was, this particular Rockefeller was foreman of Chase Manhattan Corporation, the bank.
And also very, very old, but we'll get back to that again.
So a whole bunch of his documents had been released. Basically, his chief of staff, one Joseph Reed Jr., had made sure that these documents would stay sealed until Rockefeller's death, but he died in 2017. These documents were released at the end of 2019. The New York Times ran this article, it was sort of generally around sort of Iran-US foreign affairs stuff around the 1980s and how Rockefeller and Chase Manhattan tried to sort of steer events to their benefit. And it was about sort of, it was about the Shah and Iran and about the Reagan election and all sorts of stuff. But in the middle of it, they talk about how the Rockefeller and Chase Manhattan Corporation collaborated with the Reagan campaign to, quote, preempt and discourage any sort of an October surprise that would benefit Jimmy Carter. So the
Carter, the campaign, they weren't working towards.
That's entirely true. Yes.
Yeah,
Yep,
they were working towards the
very much
Reagan
working
campaign.
with Reagan.
Yeah.
So there was this particular segment in the article which reads thusly. The Chase team helped the Reagan campaign gather and spread rumours about possible payoffs to win the release, this being the release of the hostages, a propaganda effort that the Carter administration officials have said impeded talks to free the captives. I had given my all to thwarting any effort by the Carter officials to pull off the long-suspected October surprise, Mr. Reed wrote in a letter to his family after the election, apparently referring to the Chase effort to track and discourage a hostage release deal. So that was just sort of one thing in a long list of various ways they tried to influence affairs in this region at this time. But people said, hang on a second. So originally we had documentary proof around the whole DebateGate thing that the Reagan campaign was aware of the possibility of an October surprise of this nature and obviously didn't want it to happen. Now we see that the talk of them actually working to discourage it. Now, this sort of, there were articles that then referred to this article saying, oh, haha, dun dun dun, case closed. I have to say they oversold it a little bit, really. I mean, there is no suggestion that there is no proof of an actual deal being done with Iran. Certainly nothing about some of the suggestions that say that arms sales to Iran and stuff like that. There was none of that, but it was just it showed that the Reagan campaign and their allies were proactively working to try and thwart this idea of an October surprise by some certain means.
The best theory we have, given the available evidence, is the Reagan campaign being aware that the Carter campaign is going, we don't want there to be any deal before the election. The Reagan campaign going, we can preempt that in any way, shape or form to show favoritism. Could it be really useful when and if we get into power?
So it's not quite the LaRouche theory. I mean, it's not as strong as the original claims that the Reagan campaign had dirty dealings, specifically made a deal with Iran to delay the release of the hostages. This sort of says, well, they certainly wanted to delay the release of the hostages,
but
and they did what they could to try and get in the way of this. I mean, again, a Carter administration officials said it did impede talks to free the captives, but to actually say that they sold out America to get Reagan the campaign, to get Reagan the presidency, might be a little bit strong still.
Well, yes, which is where it comes down to the big claim for conspiracy here, because if you believe people like, say, Christopher Hitchens, who is a big proponent of the October surprise theory, Lyndon LaRouche, who's also a big proponent of the Lyndon surprise theory, October surprise theory.
It's the best kind of surprise.
And Robert Perry, who is also a big proponent of the Lyndon LaRouche October surprise theory.
Variety special. I would watch that.
These people are all dead. Then you end up going, were they right? Were they actually right? Or were they right, but only in the most interesting of ways?
I mean, it's a little bit one of those.
Also, surprise!
What are the exceptions to the justified true belief things? Someone.
Well, I mean, luck plays a big role in the justified true belief calculus.
But who's the guy? Gettier?
Yep, that's the guy. He's the one who did the big thing.
The waking up at. I won't get into the philosophical technicalities right now, but the idea.
But to say, Josh holds in his pocket a watch which may or may not resemble the timepiece you have in your pocket, let alone he also holds 2 coins in his pocket which may or may not resemble the coin tossed by the person who's deciding who gets to live or die in the business that Josh belongs to.
There's also a trolley at some point, I think, running people over. I can't remember.
No, that's Judith Butler.
Fine. The point is that there's a phenomenon in epistemology of the idea of people, they sort of believe something, they have a reason to believe something, it turns out that thing's true, and yet the connection is in some way a little bit spurious. So it seems like, I don't know if this is a real example of that or not, but this does seem to be a case where they had reason to suspect this thing was true. Maybe it turns out they're partially, at least partially, maybe even mostly right, but they didn't actually have any evidence. They were basically just working off the fact that there was this suspicious timing. And was LaRouche was he the sort of a commie lefty at the time who would have been naturally opposed to the Republicans?
So the thing is, LaRouche he's kind of everywhere politically.
Yeah, that's the
It's a little bit hard to work out whose side he's on, because LaRouche is on everybody's side and nobody's side.
Yeah, so it seems to be a case of suspicions, possibly I don't want to say groundless suspicions. The timing really was quite odd. But suspicions without any real.
So there's an interesting question here. So both LaRouche and Hitchens are both suspicious of the standard story of the October surprise, and both of them point out that there is something untoward about the amount of information known by the Reagan campaign compared to the Carter campaign, which suggests that one of the campaigns, the Reagan campaign, is doing something untoward to make the other campaign look bad. Now, the question is, were they paranoid? So were they simply going, there's something wrong here, I don't know what it is, but it's paranoia? Or did they have actual evidence? And the bigger question then becomes, did they have access to a good amount of decent evidence? Or were they simply acting in a paranoid fashion because people they didn't like were in control at the time? Because if you end up going, they heard something, but they misinterpreted it, then they misinterpreted the evidence and they kind of overstated what the evidence was. If they simply went, I simply don't believe X could do Y, then you might go, well, I mean, it's true, X couldn't do Y. Your reasons for thinking that are pretty bad, so we'll disregard that.
Yes, so there you go. The October surprise conspiracy theory. Possibly there was more to it than the official theory. Possibly there was less to it than the more prominent conspiracy theories. So
it turns out that actually it seems that maybe the Reagan administration did slightly more to undermine the Carter administration than we have been led to believe.
Yes, exactly. So there you go. Interesting bit of electoral history for you there. So I don't know about you, I'm starting to sweat. I think it's time to stop recording and turn off some of these lights. But having done that, we can then go and record this week's bonus episode.
See, I'm so drunk, I'm not sweating at all.
Is that how it works?
Yeah, basically.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, the thing is, you've never been drunk, Josh, so
really
you have absolutely no idea that once you get into a zone, you just don't care.
You just don't sweat. Your body temperature regulation just gives up the ghost.
Which is why people die of alcohol poisoning. I am dying of alcohol poisoning at very moment in time.
Yep, and you're doing it for them, the listeners, to whom you are eternally grateful.
Which is why you have to pay for my entire insurance.
Yep, there we go. And you could do that by becoming a patron. Probably wouldn't actually cover all your insurance, but that's okay. So yes,
won't cover even any of it, truth be told.
Wow. But yes, if you want to become a patron, then do go to Patreon and search for the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, or go to conspiracism.podbean.com and sign up to Podbean's native.
I'm still going to die.
Campaign. Well, yes, eventually we all are, but we all watched the end of The Good Place, so it's okay now.
Is it though?
Apparently.
Do you feel better after watching the end of The Good Place?
I actually do.
So do I actually. I really like
really
the ending
good.
of that
Yeah,
show.
yeah. Anyway.
But I'm still going to die, and
well,
it's
yes.
all your fault.
And speaking of endings, this is the end of this episode.
It has been prepared for.
Yes. Because we're going to push the button and stop it. And then that's what we do every week.
Is it?
Yeah. Do you want to do that now?
Shazbutt.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
You've been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Dr. MRX Dentith, which is written, researched, recorded and produced by Josh and M. You can support the podcast by becoming a patron via its Podbean or Patreon campaigns. And if you need to get in contact with either Josh or M, you can email them at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or check their Twitter accounts, monkeyfluids and conspiracism. And remember, they're coming to get you, Barbara.